So the title of this panel is Screenwriting for a Global Audience. You all are responsible for film and television titles that have been immensely popular in the US and in China and worldwide. Zack, you write those stories. Vince, you also write them. And Vince and David, you identify those stories and properties and facilitate them reaching a larger audience. So let's start by asking very fundamentally, what do you think accounts for the international popularity of your titles?
As you said, at least to me, it all comes down to the story and the characters. I think a lot of times people make the assumption that it is the plot or the idea that appeals to people around the world. But as a writer, I happen to think that it's about the characters, whether you as an audience can really identify with these people, if they are feeling the same things that you have felt, or if you can put yourself in their shoes and wonder while you're at home watching TV what you would do if you were there. If you found your brother in prison, what would you be willing to do? Would you cover your body in tattoos and break it? I don't know if I could do that, but I think it is this universal nature of characters who feel what you feel, whether that's jealousy, love, anger, resentment, things like that.
I completely agree. Generally, people think along the lines of features being more driven by plot and story, and television by characters. But without the accessibility and ability for viewers to attach to the characters, you don't have a successful show.
And I think sometimes there's like a thin line when people approach characters. A lot of times in America, they make the mistake of saying, this character has to be likable. And I think it's really, the key is not likability, but relatability. And there's a difference there, because someone can be likable, but not relatable. But somebody who's flawed or has challenges in their lives can be relatable, and that's at the heart of it for why people watch these things.
I agree. I think it's really common for people to be able to have secret fantasies about relating to thieves and crooks and other kinds of oddball characters. But I also think that the history of entertainment has shown a lot of standard personalities and characters, and now we're in an era of more extreme personalities and characters, and people are seeking to create characters that are even further extreme, and that means extreme good, or probably more successfully extreme evil or dark or twisted or whatever.
I feel I completely agree with you guys, which is in the end, it's ultimately in the heart of the story, what's compelling, what reaches people, what communicates with people around the world. Right? It's universal, right? For features, I also think in terms of marketing distribution, it's almost like launching a rocket, right? When you make a movie, so you have to do all this work, and you plan the day of the release, and you get ready, and T-5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and all of the work is done. And it could go off, and it could just veer off and blow up. And that's the end of it. So, ultimately, it's a story, but everything, all the stars have to be aligned for it to really transcend.
Yeah, and that includes the casting, that includes, you can have the best story, but if the person who's telling it, who's the face on the screen, isn't somebody who people want to watch, that can torpedo the whole thing too, right? As much as we want to think it's all about the story, you also want to see a nice face on screen sometimes.
I'm sure we've all started projects where the best vision is the clear intention, but the layers that come into the project as it furthers and develops detract and diminish the potential of it, and it ends up being something less than what it started out as.
So it sounds like you guys were talking about some sort of X factor or some kind of little stroke of genius that happens that maybe we're not even anticipating. In your own projects, is there anything that you can point to and say, wow, that clicked something in a way that I didn't even anticipate, or that came out way better, or came out way worse, but it just made it was that like unknown magic?
I think Prison Break is a pretty interesting example because it wasn't at the time thought of as, oh, this is going to be a global hit for Fox. You know, it didn't have any huge stars in it. That's one of the things that today everyone thinks, oh, you've got to have a really big star in your show. I think, you know, Game of Thrones has shown you don't need to have a huge star. I think Prison Break showed that as well. That sometimes it's just, we have this phrase, lightning in a bottle. I don't know if that translates here or not, but sometimes this magical thing just comes together at the right place and the right time with the right people. And you don't even realize it, but you've stumbled onto a story that connects to people. It doesn't mean that you've always thought that you wanted to watch a show about people in prison, but what you realize is that you're watching a show about sacrifice, or you're watching a show that taps into feelings that you've had. Maybe Prison Break actually felt like an old Western to some people because of the way that the character of Michael Scofield was very quiet, and he said very few words. And sometimes, you know, you're just, okay, well, he seems like a hero, you know, a quiet hero, and it just connects.
I tried to sell Game of Thrones for 4 years before we sold it to HBO. And there were many different writers that had discussed wanting to do it, many different networks. It was considered possibly as a feature, but at the end of the day, the lightning in the bottle was the combination of the writers that we ended up teaming up with and HBO. Otherwise, it would have been something less, I think.
Was there anything about the fan base of the books that drove that sale, do you think, or?
Not so much the sale, but I think it influenced the decision to get it made. There were over 2 million sales of the books when we sold it. When it was announced, there were double that by the time that they ordered the show. Now there's about 10 times that, but yeah.
I remember you saying something about there being fans wrote a bunch of letters or something, and that was a key
Over
thing.
2 million letters to HBO helped influence the decision for them to make it, yeah.
So fans can have the power too, right? They, if people want to see a story told, sometimes they can push it through.
Yeah.
I think for me, you know, I've been involved with highly commercial co-productions that feature mega superstars like Jackie Chan, Jet Li, which is still the most successful co-production in China. In the U.S. It was #1 in the box office in China, #1 in the U.S. It's the only one that ever achieved that. And then I've also been involved with movies like Whiplash, which is, you know, was not.
I love that movie.
I loved it. I loved it. And, you know, while it was not shown theatrically here commercially, but it was featured at the Shanghai Film Festival. It was featured at the Beijing Film Festival. And, you know, for me as a filmmaker, I'm most proud to be involved with a film where you talk to someone and they react and their passion for it. And I think that ultimately is driven by the directors and the visionary filmmakers behind it. They're really passionate about what they did, and not just how do we raise money and make this movie here and, you know, put this here and this will then result in some tax credits and, you know, some investments from here. I think it really comes down to the story. And if the filmmaker's got to be absolutely passionate, that doesn't guarantee it'll be successful, but if it's going to be successful, it absolutely requires that.
So story being plot, story versus character, hand in hand, ideally, you've got, you know, the right type of intention going into something, but what makes it cross-culturally successful, I think, is where we would like to get to.
So